Hey y'all, thank y'all for coming. I'm going to hand it off to them to introduce themselves in a second, but we have Ray Albarez, Alec Dejesus, and Shana Dejesus. They're going to give us a lecture, but I wanted to say before, if you're not familiar with us, we have some calendars over here with our upcoming programming, and if you haven't been around the space or at least explained the space, afterwards I'll be over there by the water cooler, and I can give you a tour if you'd like. But otherwise, I'm going to hand it off to them.
Great. Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today. We're really excited to talk to you guys about mural basics. We have a lot of exciting content to share with you, so we'll just kick it off. On the agenda tonight, we'll do quick intros. We'll talk about the difference between graffiti versus murals, and then we'll just kind of break down the mural process, talk about how to find opportunities, talk about site visits, proposals, contracts, painting, and documenting and marketing. So who we are, I'm Shana, and I have a bachelor's degree in applied psychology, and I have a master's degree in IO psychology. If you don't know what that is, it's the study of humans and how they interact in businesses. And I work in the corporate world full-time. I'm a recruiter. I've been in corporate for about 11 years now, so I've been able to use a lot of my skill set to apply to my husband's mural business and help him do the fun stuff for me, but the things that maybe the artist doesn't want to focus
Not
on.
so fun. So I'm Alec Dejesus, for those who haven't met me yet. I'm a painter, muralist. I've been out here doing murals for just about 7 years now out here, but I started actually in Illinois and then got some gigs out in Florida that really, I guess checked the box that like, okay, murals is definitely something I want to pursue. It came to me during a hard time and helped me even be able to pursue art as a career. But even, I feel like over the years I've developed this like sort of special attachment and like almost a romance with murals. When you're on site, you're really sort of plugged into the environment around you, but like you feel the buzz of the city, you feel like the spirit of people around you, seeing what you're doing, engaging with you. It's so different than being closed in the studio and sort of in your own head. So it's just something that art has given me a voice, and murals has allowed me to amplify that and kind of share that with the world. A lot of my work has to do with sort of like surreal / street art, treatments of animals, figures, and storytelling. So it's a little bit about myself.
All right, my name is Ray Albarez. I'm the graffiti artist of Cohort 5. Also throughout the city, what kind of brought me to murals is mostly graffiti, where it's almost that rebellious nature. Like when you're younger, you just want to paint on something. You want to put your name. I'm sure everyone's probably drawn like a Stussy or two, on their desk. So my work kind of stems from that, from being someone that I felt that I was kind of lost as like first gen, or a child from, first gen immigrants, and just trying to make sure like who I was, making sure like reinforce that in the community. And I've kind of found graffiti to also provide me with that community, almost like a family almost, where I can just express myself, still art, with art, and still be connected with the community and not, like Alec was saying, like being shut into like a studio space. Like I was always out on the streets, like a 15, 16-year-old, just painting, doing productions, Deep Ellum, even Hope Street out in Greenville. But it's graffiti is more like a community-based piece of artwork. There's obviously rules and stuff that you got to kind of follow, but there's a lot of rules for a very anarchist type of like art form, but it definitely gives some certain trade backs of like being a part of something bigger than yourself. So I want to talk about the difference between graffiti and murals. Obviously muralists are not graffiti artists, but graffiti artists can be muralists. Some of the videos that you can probably check out, some documentaries is like Star Wars and Piece by Piece. Star Wars went from like the early 70s. I think it was Henry Chefault, and then there's Martha Cooper that did a lot of documentation about graffiti. They're the ones that really documented and propelled graffiti to what it is now and its popularity. Being like the early, mid to late 70s, Graffiti started in Philadelphia, New York. It was Taki 183 and in Cornbread, and it was just a simple, like, just putting your name up on a subway, let that subway travel, you know, throughout all the boroughs, and it was very childish, or very, you know, like rebellious in a way, but it was a way to kind of get your name known throughout the city. And from that, it grew to, you know, more elaborate tags, to like pieces, bombs, you know, throw-ups, and to the point where they were actually painted on the trains eventually, and because they weren't being accepted at galleries or museums, like it was very, it was something that you wouldn't even, or they marketed it in the way that it was bad for the community, you know, but it was all that these kids had. It's just, you know, they would have to steal spray paint, they'd have to get markers, they would make their own markers with like shoe polish and, you know, like socks basically, like with the tube and everything, and they would have to make their own supplies just to express themselves. Star Wars does a very good job at it. Piece by Piece is a Bay Area graffiti documentary that kind of tells you I guess what graffiti was on the other side of the coast, because this all kind of happened within like 10 or 15 years of each other from the different coasts, but there's definitely different styles and different influences between the two. Now, murals, obviously, they've been around for a very long time. You know, you've got Michelangelo did the frescoes or murals. I'm not exactly sure what the official name is, but there's a Sistine Chapel, and it's just been around for so long. But it was very, it was bought by the church. there was a patron behind it. I'm sure there was rules behind what the artwork could be, and you know, it fit like a certain style. It was basically a painting on a wall, whereas graffiti is more like an expression of yourself and making sure like that you're known, that you're seen, and you know, it kind of, there's not one that's better than the other, but there's something different about the two. Graffiti obviously has like a name and notoriety attached to it, that murals are not so much, but they're very artistic. And I mean, I think both of the styles are very artistic.
So when we come to murals, it is a lot more like business, promotion, sales based. That's something that I had to learn really fast. Outside, you know, I really jumped into it just being strictly, you know, just a guy who was painting out of his apartment. And you really have to pick up business tools quick. Referrals, I say with each mural, it's kind of like the billboard for your next piece. So you treat your clients right, they treat you right, the experience goes well for everyone. You put yourself into that work. Hopefully it's something that it is your work, your voice still shines through. That's something that I don't even try to really do it, I do it in my pieces. You know, if a client wants something that's not part of my portfolio, my work, my vision, I pass them on to somebody who is more their thing. But a lot of the way that I've gotten murals is through referrals, word of mouth. You know, somebody goes into a shop and they're like, oh, that's an Alec, you know, and I want to, you know, get a hold of him. My information gets passed that way. So referrals is pretty huge. So pay attention to how you're treating your client, how your client's treating you, and keeping those relationships alive, I think is super important. Recently, I started getting into cold calling, and a lot sort of built into that. You know, I don't have time to take a whole lot of shots in the dark. But what I do is, you know, social media is really good for this. You can find businesses, you can find business owners, you can do your homework on different people that you're like, oh, this is a coffee shop I went to. I think this would be a good place for me to do some work. You know, it really aligns with, you know, my daily stroll or something. It's a place I interact with. So I get to know these people. I get to know the owners, the workers, and sort of get their vibe, get their story, the business mission. And eventually I put that all together and I reach out. Recently I did this. I had done a large piece in Frisco, and it sort of started getting, you know, my name passed around the city a little bit more. And I noticed there was a gym owner who had followed me from another previous mural that was a gym. And I just kind of took the shot. I'd done enough homework that I'm like, I think, you know, we match up on enough things that this could be fun. And it worked. It was very friendly. It's very, how can I take your dream and transform your space to reflect it? I feel like that was a big part of my pitch even. So cold calling, that's a huge way to, when things maybe slow down and you have the time, do your homework on your community and start, taking those shots, introduce yourself. From there, open calls and RPFs, that's definitely a Shana one.
I was going to say, too, I feel like we're always on the hunt for just a big open wall. Like, whenever we see one, we see a building that has a big open wall, we'll be like, okay, who owns that building? That's how you notice the gym, because this woman was posting her gym, and there's these huge empty walls. And so Alec did the outreach, and she was thankfully really interested. Another way is, just keeping an eye on all the open calls. There's so many websites now out there that have open calls listed or RFPs. So I do keep my eye on a couple of these websites listed, and it can be daunting. A lot of people do apply to these posts, but you miss, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I think it's definitely worth still applying, spending a small amount of your time applying to these roles.
And those are competitive. Definitely, that's when you get into those, especially the bigger online pages, you are going up against a lot of people, so you want to make sure your presentation's super sharp.
Now with mural festivals and graffiti jams, those are still as competitive because you still have so much talent out there. But if you're in the community, as far as you make friends with someone through graffiti, you can hit them up on Instagram a little bit easier, say, hey, I'm going to be in the city, and you make a certain connection. It makes it a little bit easier to go to their city, or if they have a graffiti jam in their city, to kind of go in there and just be like, hey, I would love to paint it. And then you'll become friends, and it's a lot of that network possibility of it. They see your work and you see their work, and you just got to make sure that it's a good fit before you send them like a message and say that, you obviously have to do your research the same way you would do like a cold call. But with the graffiti community, with graffiti jams, it is very community based. So you do have to do the work in your own city before you can go to another city and say, hey, I want to paint this. So you either have to be extremely talented or just be extremely connected to get to these graffiti jams. But it is possible, as long as you're a good person and you just make the network connections there, and just be on the lookout. And there's tons of, I think almost every major city has its own graffiti jam. They have their own mural fest, maybe a couple throughout the year. There's usually, I'm sure there's spring, mural festivals and fall festivals as well to kind of look forward to. Some of these are not paid, but obviously some of the mural festivals could give you some kind of stipend or anything, but it definitely helps you get your name known a little bit more throughout the country if you wanted to, or even through the city as well.
As a muralist, it's fun when it's not paid. Yeah. Even doing trigger fingers with Ray, it's almost daunting in the fact that you kind of get to do whatever you want and you get to represent yourself. But then at the same time, no one's paying you to do it, so you get to just kind of let loose. I think that was super fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of creative freedom, and with that, there's also a lot of competition too, because they'll pair you with someone next to you that is maybe better than you or maybe not as good, and you still have to try to get up to that level or even better.
Yeah.
Great. Moving on.
So this one is, so obviously when you go, check out a wall, whether it's graffiti or murals, you want to kind of do your research on the surface. You obviously want to have your tools to measure the wall size. Obviously bring up your inspiration boards. You dress the part as well. So with graffiti, if the nature of it is not commissioned, you will definitely go in there. You have to kind of do your research on what type of wall it is. There's probably possibilities that it's like brick or metal or something, like a combination of it. So you have to be prepared to kind of have all your tools and make sure that whatever paint you have, which I typically use spray paint, very rarely use any kind of acrylic or brushwork, but works really well because you can go around through different surfaces and just kind of paint. It allows for paint to be applied to any surface almost, and a lot of it's just making sure that you do your homework, make sure you research, make sure you do as much as you can beforehand, so that when you get there, you're as prepared as you can.
I'll say on the mural side for site visits, I kind of have like a standard toolkit. measuring devices. There's so many different things you can use now, but like the simplest on hand is, you can measure with your phone, and I've checked it versus physical rulers. For a quote, you're pretty spot on. But I also bring in, different tape measures, things like that. If it's a tall wall, you definitely want to be able to, have a ladder or something like that on site if you have to get super exact. A lot of businesses will have, some sort of like records of the sizes of their space, so you can kind of use that stuff. But if you just have a client tell you from a distance, this is the size, remeasure it, because odds are they've left out a few feet for the quote. So respect your own budget on that one. And dressing the part. There's different ways. There's different clients. If it's a corporate client, I'm probably going to dress a little more snappy. Going to the gym, I was almost ready to go for a workout, but you kind of want to match the energy, because if you're pitching a job, especially off of a cold call, like, they don't need the mural. You're working a salesman sort of angle. So you want to make them feel comfortable and also like buy into your vision that's based off of their dream. But that's the business sort of mural side of things in a site visit. But we've also had a very interesting addition to where now I bring our toddler to the site visits. So that's a little extra sprinkling of chaos, but it's fun. He's a good salesman.
Good. Thanks. Okay, so proposals is definitely a really important part of the design process when you're working with a new client. It's important to tailor your proposal to the client. Include their logo or their branding. It shows that you're doing your homework. Also, it's important to include visuals, inspiration boards, your concepts and mock-ups. Really help the clients visualize how your mural is gonna look in their space. You want to break down pricing clearly. Do you want to add something about that?
Yeah, so with pricing, there's no one way to do it, especially with clients if you're giving them a proposal. One thing I do, though, is I have, and this is just a little nugget here, is I don't have an itemized sort of budget list for materials, because some clients might want to reduce cost, and that's maybe more their focus than having great art in their place. So with an itemized list, they can sort of pull like, oh, well, we don't need this quality of that. Instead, what I've done is I've given them a flat rate, for this, and that also includes a little bit of a buffer, because each wall is pretty unique and provides unique problems. No mural I've done, even if it's, kind of cut and dry, this interior, have a key to the business, there's always going to be unique problems, and a buffer is a good thing to have if you need to, maybe get a larger ladder. We definitely run into that. So give yourself a little wiggle room, but also like make it a little simplified on their end.
We also include an outline of the process, kind of step by step, so they can know what to expect. Include timeline. If you think it's going to take you 2 weeks to complete the mural, definitely include that. I think it shows that you're organized and you're thinking through the whole process. Specify materials and protection. And again, just keep it super professional. We like to have a template that I use, and basically we use the same proposal template every time, just plug and play with the different images of their space or the branding. Just kind of
personalize it.
Yeah.
So this is an example of like, we have a whole presentation that we'll shoot to a client. But what I like to do is with mock-ups, kind of take the guesswork out of their end of things. A lot of times your client isn't coming from the art world or isn't necessarily a visual thinker, which I'm like strictly that. So what I do is when I do a site visit, I'll go through, take head-on shots that give me something that I can reference accurately. But also when I shoot them the sketch, they're like, this is roughly 30% give or take what it's going to look like. I always leave a little bit of room for evolution for the piece, because, doing something on your iPad is very different than painting on a 40-foot wall.
Yours are pretty close.
It's pretty close, yeah. For my process, it's kind of crazy.
So now we get into, obviously, once you get the contract, once you send in the design and it's approved, now it's actually putting it on the wall. And you definitely want to get in there and make sure that the scale is correct. There's a couple methods. You can obviously project it using the projector. You obviously have to make sure that if it's exterior, it has to be done at night. If it's interior, you're gonna have to like still kind of wait if it's night, or if they're able to close the windows off, or just make sure that there's no light inside. And then obviously you go in with your tools, whether it's a paintbrush or spray paint, to start to outline what you need to paint. The other method is a doodle grid, which you can see there on the container. It says reserved. It's got some shapes on it. And then you go in there and you superimpose it on, like, I use Procreate, like on my phone, and you just kind of play with the opacity and the scale of the image that you want to paint. And then you have your reference that you can go in to the container, to the wall, and you can say, okay, well, their eye is next to the little diamond shape. The knuckle is right next to where the S is. The wrist is right there where the little curves symbol is at. And then you just kind of draw it out. And typically, when you want to take on a mural and use the doodle grid, the doodle grid will depend on what level of skill and what level of detail that you want on the wall. So obviously, if you want more detail, you can add more shapes to it, more doodles. Now, if you're maybe a little bit more seasoned and you have a little bit more skill, like if it's a figure, if you just know the anatomy, you can use less if you want to, and you kind of take some of that out of it, because you do have to trust yourself and say that, that you're still an artist, and you don't necessarily have to, like, you can still be an artist and change things at the wall while you're painting it. The other form, which is not shown, is grid lines. So that is, I'm sure if anyone's here has been an artist and been classically trained, you can just draw grids and say, okay, well, this box has these shapes. It has a nose, an eye, and you kind of follow that. And then the other style is freehand, which Alec does very well.
Oh, man. So that's, I guess the way I freehand is a lot like doodle grid, but like minus the doodle grid. I kind of say I use like an environmental grid. So whatever features that are in the wall, you kind of see in this piece here, there's like insets and there's like bricks that change, direction, things like that. There's the way the roof slopes, and then, you get these little architectural pop-ups. What I'll do is I'll sort of, on my iPad, or like I'll just get a printout of my mock-up and I'll line everything up. I'm like, okay, this eye lines up with these two like intersecting lines. And then I'll just go up, I'll hit those marks. And so I do a giant gesture sketch, back away when I need to. And so far that's carried me through. I will, if there's lettering, different things that need like logos, stuff like that, I've used projection. But with my work, largely it is figurative. It's more just like a massive painting, not so much like an ad. No knocks to the ads out there, but so far using my environment and these just different sighting points is how I've knocked out my sketches. And it's worked so far, but it's gotten pretty scary.
And that's where you kind of just trust the process and trust yourself as an artist to say, I can use these shapes and I can make changes as I go.
Let those happy accidents happen. In my most recent mural, I did sort of run into a point where I'm like, okay, I've got to really trust my skills here, because there was a part where there was a giant wing super high up. It was like 30 feet up. And then I realized when I'm up there, I can really only see 3 feet radius pretty much. So I'd have to trust my process. But then when you're doing a line of a 15-foot feather, and then you lower your lift and you've got to do it again and make sure it doesn't look like wonky or like a hand in a glove versus like an actual wing. That was one of those moments where I was like, I see why people project, it's kind of crazy.
So contracts, another really important part of the process. It's really important to have a contract for every project that you do. The importance of it protects both the artist and the client, and it really ensures that there's clear expectations, reduces misunderstandings, just paints a really clear outline of the project. We like to include in our contracts, we define the scope. It really just outlines the design and dimensions, kind of adds all the different details of the project. We also include clarity on payment terms. We include what the payment schedule will be like. Again, we establish a timeline talk about what happens if there's weather, if there's bad weather, kind of any sort of delays, how we're going to handle that. Another really important thing is addressing the ownership and usage rights. We learned this a little bit the hard way. Alec had a mural where we didn't have a clause about ownership at all. And after he completed the mural, the business owner created merch with his mural image on it. And technically, they don't have the right to do that. So we learned, and then obviously after that, put a clause in there addressing that. Also, we include maintenance. What happens if the wall gets damaged? Who is responsible for fixing that? And then we add cancellation terms. What happens if someone wants to back out of the project? If you don't have, you could go for a lawyer, work with a lawyer to create your contract. If you don't have the means to do that, honestly, ChatGPT will be your best friend. It will create the whole thing for you. I use it every day. So it's a great way to create a template.
I would just kind of jumping in on that. Our contract has been made up of a lot of weird situations, and I feel like starting out, you run into those. But over time, you learn how to either work around those with clients, but contracts felt really almost gross to hand to somebody because you're vibing, you're like, oh yeah, let's get into this together. You're gonna let me do a huge painting. There's this trust, and then all of a sudden you're like, sign this, and then I'll really trust you. But I have found that not only does it show that you're a professional, you take yourself and them seriously, but kind of jumping in, there are clear understandings. You can say referring to the contract, and it's a way to back yourself up. And it's also a way that they can sort of see what they can and can't do with you. Odds are they're not going to read it, but it is a good way to just at least set the understanding. And, you're treating them how to treat you and vice versa. You're telling them this is how it is to work with me, and you can trust that. I'll say this is very different than the graffiti world, but always use a contract. Any bad situation I've run into with clients, or you get ghosts, or you end up doing a bunch of sketches for free, is because you haven't had a client, you haven't had that first payment installment. And if you don't have that, if you get a lot of people that they're business first, as they should be, but that comes with a lot of accidentally trying to take advantage. And a contract will prevent that, and that will keep you from having any animosity towards them. And it is really hard to show up to a mural that you now hate because you've been screwed over in the process. But the thing is by not having that contract, you're the one who's at fault. So cannot stress that enough. I have had some really bad situations where I learned to make sure I had a contract.
So, do you want to take the first couple bullets?
Yeah, so pricing and payment. So this is like kind of figuring out what Ray was saying, like figuring out your surface, kind of understanding the workability of the site. What kind of hours can I be in there? What kind of surface is it? If it's interior and you're working with brick, like charge for that because you're going to spend a lot of time scrubbing. If you're only able to use brush, if you are going to do spray paint inside, you got to set up your space for it too. That's extra time. So brick is always like the rougher the surface, charge them more. And it's not like you're charging them like a ton more, you're just respecting your time. And yeah, I've already sort of said my bit about the material fee. It'd be pretty clear about it. This is either my range. A lot of times, if it's just in the proposal phase, I'll say, if it's more simple, if the wall is easily accessible, if it's inside, like it's going to be on the lower range. If it's more a complicated design, even if it's smaller, but then they want, a ton of figures and stuff in there, you charge it more. So it scales with difficulty.
We do also charge a sketch fee. So if a client wants to just get an idea, get some sketches going, we'll charge a sketch fee, which can range usually between like $200 to $500. And just a way for them to commit in some way to show how serious they are about the project. And always, we didn't put on here, but we did include sales tax. We also learned that the hard way, that you want to, when you're giving your price, you always say this is what it'll be plus sales tax.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're paying like no matter what, sales tax is going to be taken out. So say your job is $5,000 and you didn't charge sales tax, they're taking that out of the $5,000. So that's kind of messing up what you're getting if you don't do it, and they will penalize you for it.
So then you get into ordering materials. Obviously, if it's a place in Dallas, there's a few places. There's a rec shop that's in East Dallas. You guys can Google it. Also, I think they have their own Instagram under rec shop. The other thing, I'm going to plug my own service in there because it is, I'm part of this. So I do have a spray paint delivery service where I buy paint in bulk and then I sell it and deliver it to anyone in the city, Dallas, Fort Worth area. Another good site that you can use is Art Primo, and these are all spray paint so far. So Rec Shop is spray paint, I'm spray paint, Art Primo as well as spray paint, and then there's Spray Planet, which is 94, which is the paint from Spain. Art Primo sells Montana Black, Montana Gold, Belton, and those are specifically like German paint. It is much cheaper than going to Jerry's, and Michael's, because I think they charge about $10 or $11 per can.
Up to 14.
Yeah, up to 14. There you go. Where Art Primo, it'll just be maybe half that, or maybe like $8 or $9 or something for a can. And then you can also get like certain supplies. You can get markers that are acrylic markers that can be used for murals, and it's acrylic paint, just like you would buy any kind of acrylic, like house paint or something. Then obviously the next step is Home Depot to get your gallon paint where you need to fill in large areas. You have all of your supplies there, from rollers, tape, safety equipment, like lifts or harnesses, tarps, anything like that. And speaking about equipment and safety, you do have to be careful of the paint that you use. Obviously with acrylic paint, it's a little bit safer. It's all water-based. When you get to using spray paint or even oil-based paint, it becomes a little bit toxic. You don't want that stuff on you. I typically paint with a long sleeve, have a mask, sometimes a hat, because you want to protect yourself. It's cool to say that you would die for your art, but I'm sure it's going to be very painful and just not fun. The next thing is obviously, if you're working on a lift on a really tall mural, you do want to have some training. Sometimes when you work through these things, like sometimes they'll just be like, oh, well, we got a lift, go ahead and hop on it, But it is always good practice to be there and just say, okay, well, I'm going to take these steps to make sure that I'm safe. Those are harnesses. Those are just knowing the lift itself, making sure that everything is good. Typically, you'd want to talk to the lift rental company just to make sure that everything is kind of ironed out. If it's gas, if it's electric, whatever. And the other thing is obviously something that's super important that you would never really think about is the sounds. You want to be aware of your surroundings. You don't want to, let's say if you work on a wall that's on the side of a street, you want to hear for cars, or you don't want to back up too far and then just say, oh, well, I'll be fine. There hasn't been any cars at all. And then something like an accident would happen. With graffiti, it's, you're not necessarily listening for anything. Well, you will listen for stuff that's dangerous, around if you're in abandoned buildings or tunnels, but obviously there's people out there that do not want you to do graffiti, and you have to listen for them as well and make sure you take care of yourself. And just make sure that you're completely safe, and just make sure you do your research. There is a place that I don't think we've talked about. It's called the Fabrication Yard that's here in Dallas. It's in West Dallas. So if you do want to venture out and start practicing, you don't have to just wait for that first mural to actually get your practice in. You want to go in there and just like experiment and see what you're capable of, and build your skills. And the good places for that is the Fabrication Yard.
You want to start with that one, or you want me?
Yeah, you can.
All right. So executing the design. So say everything's lined up. It's your first day. You're starting to paint. Especially if it's exterior, you got to clean it. All that dust, grime is going to be sitting on there, and any paint you put on top of that is going to come right off. It's going to flake, slide, kind of whatever. So make sure you're like buffing your wall. You get a good primer. I use Kills. I think a lot of people that I've muraled with have used Kills, which is also like a really cheap kind of way to prime and make sure your paint's going to stick. So, I mean, scrub it. Scrub as clean as you can make this wall, do it. Interior, usually you don't have too much to fuss with. It is a good idea to prime, but a lot of times I'll go into new businesses and they've got, a couple coats of fresh paint on top of primer. It's really kind of set to go at that point. Setting up the workplace, think about like how you're going to execute your design and like where your things need to be so they're not in your way. That's definitely a safety thing. If you have a bunch of cans kind of around, if you got ladders kind of scattered around, the tidier your workspace, the quicker you're going to be. And then I also set up, like, I had a job where I had a big lift, but it was, it was one of the boom lifts. So if I'm up 30 feet, I don't want to have to go back down to get something I forgot. So I'd have sort of color systems. Okay, I'm going to hit this part of the mural. I need these colors. And I would set up a whole workstation in the basket and then just have, stuff off to the side that I might need later on. But set it up to make it as easy for you as possible. I definitely go with like supply station, and I kind of have a universal system on my site. And I think a lot of muralists should focus on this a little bit more, but like keeping your space clean. That's also like drips, stuff like that. Like if you're doing something for a client, again, like word of mouth is huge. Don't tear up their space. Be respectful of the spot that you're in because they are letting you use your gifts. They're paying you to do it, and it's a unique experience to be able to do it, so cherish that spot. I tape off, like usually when I set up tarp, set up my equipment, and tape. That's 1, 2, 3. And I'd say a lot of people kind of go for that blue painter's tape, but spend a couple extra bucks, get frog tape. Green is really good for exterior. Interior, I tend to go with yellow because it still can pull some of that paint off the wall. But frog tape all the way, you get cleaner lines, it sticks longer, and it tears away less paint when you're pulling it. It's also just fun colors. I mean, green and yellow. And then you're starting. So that's where we were talking about the different methods. For me, everything's set up. I go, and then I just start drawing. I've got videos you can see like on my Instagram where I do show like my step-by-step when I'm painting. But the most fun and kind of free part is just laying down that sketch. But definitely set yourself up for success with your workspace.
Now, we can probably stay on this one for a little bit. So for the graffiti part of it, which, if anyone is interested in doing graffiti, there is a certain thing that you would do in graffiti where you go into these spaces that you definitely want to respect the space that you're in. If you're going in there, if you're leaving paint cans, if you're leaving caps, if you're leaving, whatever kind of trash in there, people will notice, and then people will say something and, say, hey, don't leave your trash where you paint, and it's the same thing as if you were doing a mural, you would do it in graffiti. And also just making sure that you respect the space. The other thing is also, you don't necessarily have to prep the surface as much, but just be aware of it. There are, let's say if you're painting like a set of trains, for instance, you definitely want to cover the numbers that are on the train because you're there to create artwork, not to make the train workers' jobs harder. Because if they can't identify the train, then they have to go in there and make sure there's probably a process that they have to do to find out what train that is, and they use the numbers for that. So you make sure that you cover those up, you paint what you need to paint, get your photos, take the tape off, and then you can leave the numbers and it's nice and clean. The workers will love you for it. And I think that's it, for graffiti. Mm-hmm. The other thing is sometimes, working with the weather, and this could be some of these tools are probably a little bit more for graffiti than murals, because I think when you're doing a mural, you may not want to be, you typically probably won't want to be on a job site when it's raining. Sometimes if you're in graffiti, there's a graffiti fest, there's a mural fest, and it rains that weekend. But you have to, the mural still has to get done, the graffiti still has to get done. So what I typically do is, unless it's some kind of weird monsoon, it doesn't rain the whole day. So you just kind of hang out, you get to know people, you get to network. But then that moment that it does dry up, you can make sure you have a towel with you. Wipe the wall, and it's good enough for spray paint, Maybe for brushwork, it may be a little bit different. But just make sure you have a towel ready for it. The other thing, obviously, have waterproof boots, like a nice waterproof raincoat, because you obviously you don't want to get sick, and you don't want to get cold, you don't want to get any of that stuff there. You just want to take care of yourself. Now with heat, obviously we're in Texas, and I painted a lot here in Texas, and I always carry an umbrella. People will make fun of me and say I'm like the Mary Poppins of graffiti, but when that sun hits and they're dying and they're like drinking like on their second gallon of water, I'm still painting because I have that umbrella. Sunscreen is super important. Obviously, you want to take care of yourself. There's you don't want to get cancer, from the paint or the sun. Plenty of water, light cotton clothing for the heat. There is. I like to go to Uniqlo and get the AirTech clothes that they have because it's super light and it breathes, so it kind of there's a lot of good flow. And then I think something that Alec found was just like neck fans, you can get those on Amazon. They put fans on everything, I think, now.
Yeah, we're set now.
Yeah. Also, you can have like a cooler with some ice and just put like a wet towel in there, and then you can just put it on your neck, and that helps you. Now, with the cold, same thing, waterproof boots, whenever, like I painted some places in Wichita that there's snow, or it's just extremely cold, like up in Chicago or something. Like sweat and all of that stuff, like that stuff still gets cold. So you just want to make sure that you don't get any water on you when it's cold, because that will get extremely cold. Hand warmers, you can put those inside of your gloves and still paint. And then another thing is, you kind of have to insulate your bag a little bit. I've been on trips where friends of mine will, sometimes they'll leave their paint in the trunk of the car, and it'll get down to like 30, 40 degrees at night. And the next morning we want to go paint, and their paints, it doesn't work as well. The pressure dies down, and it doesn't come out as much. And then obviously if you're painting in the cold and you took it into the hotel, you took it inside so it's nice and insulated, and you're at the job site and you're outside, you still want to keep it in the bag. You don't want to take it out and like display it so that it's easier to grab, because it'll get cold over time. And the other thing is also just wear thermals. Again, I'm plugging Uniqlo here, but Heat Tech is really good. It's very, it has good insulation. I wear like insulated socks, the whole thing, just to make sure that I'm warm. And I'm not, so I'm just worried about just painting and nothing else.
Yeah. I'll say on the mural side of this, especially with the exterior pieces, you have to pay attention to them. I've never paid attention to the weather. It would be a daily surprise until I started doing murals. My recent one, I really had to pay attention because I was operating heavy machinery on a lawn. And you don't want that to tip, flip, get stuck, anything like that. And I was also painting in the rainy season, so it was like everything was sort of stacked against my lift experience on that one. If you are working on some sort of turf like that, and you have heavy machinery, one thing I found was using plywood to sort of like space out the weight. From like the wheels, so I'd kind of get it to where it needed to go. So I'd kind of hit my planks where I wanted the wheels to sit, park it on top of there, and then I could paint for the day. I'd be all right. With spray paint and brush paint, they have different behaviors depending on the elements. With murals, you're selling a service. You also have to make sure it lasts. So pay attention to what's on, the cans or the buckets or the tubes, whatever you're painting with. Pay attention to those notes. They're there to help you and keep your piece shining as long as possible. Definitely for heat and cold, be prepared. Murals, you're really, you got to kind of find that sweet spot. But if it's rained that day, you're probably not going to be on site because you have to make sure that stuff sticks. Because I've definitely been a little stubborn and painted while it was still raining, and you come in next day and that stuff's sagging. And that's even more work for you. So if you are forced to take a day off, focus on some admin work, do a little something else, but and make sure you're operating in the right conditions, because this thing has to last, or you're going to have to, apologize profusely and do a lot of cleanup work, a year down the road. Definitely another thing I ran into that I hadn't, previously had to worry about too much unless I was spraying was wind. I was up about 40 feet in the air on, a boom lift, and nobody tells you how much those things sway. So you definitely have your harness in there, you're hooked up to that. But I would have days where I couldn't do any of the high up work because the winds, we were in that stormy season, the winds were like 20 miles an hour. And it took me one good rock to go ahead and call it for the day. Because that's when I was on one end of the basket and ended up on the other. So be smart about it. If you think you're tough and you end up not being able to paint for 2 weeks because you injured yourself, you're the only person who's paying for that time.
Another thing to add to this is you have to kind of check, obviously like you were saying, like check the cans, check the paint that you're using, the science behind it, because with the pressurized spray paint can, if it's cold, the more you use it, the less there is and the colder the can is. So if you don't have hand warmers, if you don't have gloves, your hand is going to get colder, and that can just lead to uncomfortable, you'd be uncomfortable, you're not going to be able to paint. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Documenting a promotion. So we are definitely in that era of like, if you don't see it on Instagram, it doesn't count. It's a little silly, but as artists, we're also in this sweet spot where we don't have to always go through galleries or different gatekeepers. By promoting what we're doing properly, we're kind of enhancing the blip that we have on the local, national, whatever radar you want to be a part of. What I do in sites, even in site visits, I kind of think about, how am I going to document this? When I'm sketching the piece, I think of different shots, when I'm painting. Excuse me. If it's a day where I'm just doing a bunch of fills, I'll set up a time lapse, because nobody wants to watch, 3 hours of you rolling paint. That'd be pretty weird. But, like, think about your shots, think about, a lot of short form videos, because what we do is so unique. I feel like that it is pretty fascinating to watch, the fact that like I'll do it all day and I'll still find myself in a rabbit hole of like watching graffiti videos for 30 minutes. And I'm like, man, I need to clock out. But it's so interesting that you don't just get to be an artist anymore. If you want to sort of grow your career, a lot of it is self-promotion, and you got to be pretty shameless about it. You got to do, weird selfies on site and stuff. But all of it, just helps promote what you're doing. It helps that billboard for the next piece shine, so you get to actually push that stuff out there. I've also started with bigger budget projects to save myself time, hire videographers. If the budget accounts for it and you're still like able to eat afterwards, do that, because that's what they do. Like, I think as a muralist, I don't think as a videographer or a photographer. So I do all right, but when I started bringing professionals in, things it looked like it was professional. So do it. It's annoying sometimes. You want to just get into the studio and paint, and then you're like for a half hour setting up a shot and your tripod falls over or something. Get a good tripod. But it does count. It does count, and it makes your mural work for you after you're done with it. And it's truly all about, especially if you want to do this full time, continuing to find that consistency, and promotion is going to help you do it. A lot of what we do with the videos is short form, TikTok, Instagram, all that stuff. Get it out there, make it snappy, but then there's also some really useful things you can do with it outside of, feeding the social media beast, which is, portfolio. I get to tell clients, you can see how I do what I do, and it really lays it out so they can kind of see what working with me would look like, how it's done, and there's professionally some really practical applications.
Well, when when he finishes a mural, what I like to do is like massive outreach to just local news channels and media. Just say, hey, this big mural was just finished. We'd love to tell our story about it. And most likely someone will be interested. They're always looking for a good story. So it's, whether you can do it like on the news or like a magazine or online presence too, it just doesn't hurt.
Yeah. We ended up getting a lot of articles based on that last mural because it was large, but it was also about just setting up a quick press release. Shana shot it out to a bunch of different like local mags, and news sources, and it helped it blow up a lot because it was real world news at the time. It's important. It's a step that a lot of artists like don't even think about necessarily. Is like, oh, let's shoot this to the news. But they have people whose job is to look at all the upcoming potential stories, what's going on locally. People have to be connected into that buzz. And what we do as artists is really create that buzz. So, don't be afraid to promote yourself.
Yeah, they want that good feeling segment. At the end of all the bad news.
We're the fluff.
Yeah. They want that fluff piece. Now with graffiti, as far as like when you document stuff, it's super important to just kind of take care of the location. You obviously don't want to give, you don't want to tell everyone where you're at, and especially not at the moment, because there are times when, you want to respect the space and leave it the way that you left it or the way that you found it, but you do have to take photographs. Now there are times when some photographers, videographers like approach me and say, hey, I would love to go shoot you sometime, or I'd love to go take this video of you, whatever. And you have to make sure that you let them know that they have to understand the culture as well that's behind it, and how precious it can be, that it can, in an instant, it can be taken away. And they just have to respect the space as well. The same care that you do when you go to go paint, they should take that same care as well to protect it. And not so much as far as like gatekeeping or being secretive. It's just more about protecting the culture, protecting what you're painting, what your art form is, and the community that supports you in that.
I will say too, with documenting, it's important to keep your website up to date, and I would recommend using a format that makes it really easy to see all your different projects, because older clientele may not be on Instagram, but they want to be able to see all your work. So people are still going to your website. So it's just important to make it super easy to use, and they don't scroll and click on all these different things to see them.
And you can see like where you're progressed as well, like all the projects you've done. You can just kind of say, well, this is where I started this year, this is where I'm at the end of the year, and you can kind of set goals for yourself throughout your career. Cool. So, and if y'all do plan on starting murals and stuff, make sure to contact Alec or myself, and we can definitely help you guys out with that. So, yeah.
Yeah, bring on any questions. I feel like this is
a question. I got things to start. At what point in you provide the mark? Do you get do you get the site contact first? Do you get the pay on first? How old is that?
On my end, I try to avoid free sketches at all costs, because anytime you do free sketches, I feel like they're like, oh, we can get that from other people too. So you're kind of hurting the rest of the community, but also you get a lot of ghosts when you do free sketches. And I've gotten suckered in by people who I thought I could trust, and it ends up just not going my way. And I do a lot of the consulting for them, and the only person who wasted their time was me. So it depends with the RFQs, like in the calls for art, in those proposals, typically you'll have to sketch something, that's just kind of part of it. So if it's worth it to you to do that, do that. Your sketches also are part of like, I want to say it's called inherent copyright. You don't necessarily have to do the paperwork to file copyright on that, but because you are the creator, you do have the only rights to it. So if you do provide those free sketches and they go find a cheaper artist, you could still get paid. You just have to do that footwork. But with the RFQs, sometimes they want a sketch in there, and if you gauge that, that's up to you if it's worth it or not. But typically in proposals, we'll include a portfolio of relevant work. I'm not going to, go to somebody who wants nothing to do with animals and show them all the animal features that I've done. I'm going to show them more figurative things like that. So a relevant portfolio is going to get you a long way from free sketches. But if you are already under contract, like that's when the mock-ups start happening. That's like my whole sketch phase. So I'll start with like a thumbnail of like 1 or 2 concepts, see what they like and don't like from those, whittle it down to a final black and white, and then I start colors. So that's the beginning design phase of it.
That was
This like including the calls, like
Cold call, yeah. So the way I did that is it was just like an outreach message and a site visit. So I didn't have the gig necessarily, but I did my homework. I was like, there's a ton of wall space here. And I knew what she had followed me from. It was a boxing gym that I had done. And I'm like, I would love to kind of revisit that. So I went there, kind of talked about it, showed her relevant work. I think also we are in an age where people don't really do the in-person stuff. And you're not a door-to-door salesman about it, but like being able to go there and kind of talk with the client versus a Zoom call or just messaging, like you're building that human connection. So you can decide also like what red flags they have and if that's the right job for you or not too. But then once we start getting that like, okay, let's work together, contract installment, that's when the sketches start.
when we do a sketch fee, we do say that it goes towards the total. Too.
Yeah.
So it's not like on top of the total
And the
cost.
sketch fee is really good too, because that's them committing. Like, if they're going to pay $250, you're at least going to get paid if they don't go with you. But they're showing that they're taking you a little seriously. Just even that installment and saying, hey, like, I understand this is like a little bit of trust going on here. Like that will apply towards, the fee of working with me. Like that will go towards the final price. And like, that makes them feel good too and taken care of.
I get a punch.
No, both of you.
Does anybody ever work in the contract in your heritage, like in the board was heartbreaking comment on with Richard comment?
Like in short, aggressively. Like, no, and I won't go into too many details, but we had a client who, this was also a learning lesson of like contract before you start the work. Cause they ended up like going like, oh, well, like I'm going to sign the contract, go ahead and start. And then like I'd done quite a bit of work and there still wasn't a signature. There was money there, but there wasn't any actual contract in place. And then they decided to start changing their mind, and I was already on site from like a bunch of revisions and stuff. So, what I started doing was keeping track. I was keeping track of, all the delays. I was keeping track of, any of the verbal abuse. I mean, stuff like that. And I work like a workhorse, it's, but this was a client that was just kind of used to treating people in a really bad way. So I kept track of it all. And by the end of it, we had about 9 pages of breaches. And so when you present them with 9 pages of breaches, when we finally had enough, they realized that like, we don't want to take this further. And so if you treat yourself like a serious business, you force them to do that too. So we kind of got to a point of mediation, but it was, we handled ourselves as professionals to the point where they're like, okay, like, do your thing and we will let you go, because that is the cheapest way, is to just let you do your job. But also, I will say a plug for Cedars is they do have workshops, like kind of like the business side of art. There's been copyright talks that I've been to here, contract talks. Like, go to all of those that you can, because I still reference those all the time. And it's done nothing but strengthen my practice. But yeah, a huge plug here is they give all the secrets away. Yeah. Yeah.
Lovely.
that. So you go.
How do you actually cut the walls? How are these or what's the actual process?
Well, if you want to tackle.
Well, with graffiti side, you typically don't clean the wall, so that's easy. You just go to paint it. Most of my commission work has been indoors for the most part. Some of the stuff that I do exterior it's typically rotating artwork. So I do trigger fingers every year, and it doesn't have to. It only has to last for a year because we're going to put a new coat of paint on it. Once you get enough coats of paint on it, then it becomes its own primer in itself, and you don't have to do as much, But that's the great thing about graffiti, that it's more performative than it is a long-lasting art form, or art piece. It can be. You definitely, when you go to that, Alec will probably go in more in depth, is actually power washing, priming it, then putting your base coat on there, and then just actually painting the piece. And then there's even like finishing paint where it's like UV coated, or they've got what's it called? The graffiti, anti-graffiti coat.
Anti-ray coat.
Yes, the anti-me coat, which I would love to use that so I can turn it on them. But there's stuff, beyond after you paint it that you can do to protect it even longer. But it is a lot of just hard work of just scrubbing the wall. Now with graffiti, there are certain places that I would paint, and the wall's basically coming off because it's so old and it's no one's taking care of it. You do have to go in there and just kind of wipe it with a glove, or just try your best, and then you can paint on it. So, but a lot of it is temporary as far as graffiti.
Yeah, especially with exterior, like you're dealing in Texas is dusty. It just is. Especially with the heat, things dry out, pollen, dust. Any wall you want to power wash it if you have the ability to. If paint is coming off, like wire brushes, paint scrapers, depending on how textured your wall is, you don't I would try and avoid any sort of like chemical peeling, because if that stuff doesn't fully evaporate off the wall, that's going to work on your paint too. That stuff's pretty strong. Luckily, and that's why I recommend Kills. It sticks to just about anything, and it's a really good base to start a mural on. So if you don't, necessarily do the best job cleaning, it kind of makes up for that. But yeah, I would say wire brushes, scrapers, some rugged, just, old shirts or something if you just need to get some dust off. And then companies like Mural Colors, I've worked with them. They provide washes for walls, like a pre-wash for walls, but then they also have the anti-graffiti coats, the UV coats, and they also are a great resource for knowledge. They'll tell you how it all works, but you can also message them because they want you to work with them. And I feel like what's also really great about the mural, street art, graffiti crowd, it is very community based. I feel like I've never been in a more tight-knit clique of artists. It's not even cliquey, that's the thing. It's it's more like you're going to a cookout and doing a jam with friends. Or even when I was in Wild West Mural Fest, it was just such a community vibe. And there's going to be egos out there, but I feel like they just don't last that long unless they're unnecessarily good at what they do. It's a place to be humble and inviting, I think.
Everyone's DM away from each other, so
Yeah.
Did you guys just jump into making murals? Because I paint on canvas, but I have this vision for a mural, but I've never done a mural. Sometimes I just doubt that I can't do it. So the trends work your way up to making a mural, you just did it.
Sure, different journeys here, yeah.
So I just jumped into it. It was obviously after seeing the documentaries and my friends painting and everything, it was just I guess it's my turn now. And I remember the first piece that I painted, the cops came, and I was underage, so they just called my parents, but I was there for about an hour at the wall, and they were just like, man, it looks really good, but you shouldn't.
We got to do this.
Yeah, we got to do this. So they called my parents and went home. But that's just, I think that's what you just have to do. You just have to just do it. And I would recommend when you first start your first piece, your first mural, whatever, you make it simple. Probably what you paint on canvas, you use a brush, you maybe put a little bit more detail in it. With something larger scale on your first one, I say you just make a simple shape or a simple object or whatever that interests you, and just make it like 2 or 3 colors, and just to kind of get a feel of it. And then you add a little bit more, as you kind of progress and you're going, as like when you start to trust yourself to paint a larger scale. And then just jump right in, just do it. The other thing also is your supplies as well. So whether you're using spray paint or maybe I could probably only talk about the spray paint side of it. You want to get good spray paint. You want to get good caps because you don't want to complete your mural or complete whatever project you're working on and then be discouraged by it and then say, oh, well, this isn't for me because the tools that you had were not the best tools. Maybe certain spray paint, like Rusto, for instance, is pretty good, but it doesn't have like a nice clean edge to it, I would recommend, for Rustos, I would recommend you'd have to get an adapter for it and then get, like thin or fat caps for it. And you can get that at Rusto, at that rec shop, and they can help you with that. You can hit me up on Instagram and I can help you with that as well. Another good spray paint brand is Montana, like 94, Montana Black, Montana Gold. And that stuff is like, it's very opaque. It comes with the caps that gives you the nice clean lines. You can still do shades. And that way when you step back and like look at it once you're done, you're like, okay, well, I did pretty good and I can keep going, because you don't want to set yourself up for failure the very first time.
For me, I sort of hit a make it or break it moment with murals. I was just always a studio painter. I was like in a really rough spot for a while, and then one of my buddies was like, hey, I'm teaching at the school in Florida, like, how would you feel about doing a mural? So I just sort of had that like do or die situation, and that was my first large scale mural. But it's interesting with murals because I feel like there is a lot of resources for large scale painting, but it's just not like right in front of you. You got to really do your homework. Definitely don't go into it blind, figure out what you would need to do to accomplish it because it's not studio painting. And I love painting in the studio too. I'm not knocking it, but it is just kind of a different beast. You have to treat it as such. The materials is a huge one. Like, you get what you pay for, I feel like, a lot of times, especially with spray paint. Like, I love Montana, and also I live right by the rec shop, so I'm usually like going over there and getting the closest color I can, which sometimes it's slim pickings, but yeah, with getting into murals as a business though, that was a bit different. Especially I came out here, and I didn't really know anybody, but I started mingling with people in the scene and assisting. And I think that's another thing is it's good to be humble and not, too big-headed, because it's good to be the student. Even when I've worked on collaborative murals, like I'll go in there and just see what can I absorb, not what can I show everybody else. Like I know what I can do, but like what can I add to that? So assisting, visiting murals, like if they're like, hey, I'm painting here from this time to this time, and you're able to like go see what's up with them, and you can kind of watch and see. YouTube's a great resource for like techniques. But when I first came out here, I was assisting murals for like a good year plus before I started getting my own connections enough to start going off on my own and doing it. And like, because we're all, I would say, a relatively friendly bunch, like muralists are accessible, even if they have, a big following, and just shoot them a DM. Like, how did you do that? And if they are someone that's going to gatekeep their tricks, you don't.
Yeah, it's easy. You'll know it right off.
That's on them. Yeah. But there's no one way to go about it. Sometimes people just get that opportunity. They're like, hey, are you willing to? And then there's slower ways to learn as you go. I've never done like an actual lift training course, but I've partnered with enough muralists to where I got the training on the job. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so why does she is how long did it take from the first time you started doing murals and graffiti for it to pick up your work to pick up and for you to start like actually getting consistent business?
Well, on the mural side, it's never consistent. I think your hits just kind of get bigger. And that's what you're building up towards, because like I'm always filling the time in between walls, and like some clients take forever, and it's like 2 months, 3 months before you're actually there painting. So I would say it's only consistent when you're doing stuff like, you know, applying to everything you possibly can. There are people that get really busy, and like luckily I feel like I'm in that position where, you know, I'm scheduling things out. But understanding your process is a big part of that too. Is like, how can I make my own process a little more fluid to where I'm also securing clients while I'm doing sketches for this. So I think like stack your stuff wisely, but like don't overbook yourself either. Because like I've gotten in those situations. I feel like everyone's gotten in those situations where you're like, oh, I think I'm like spread a little thin. But I'd say engaging more with your community locally is going to help boost your business, because like myself, if someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I want something that says Dallas and like has a bunch of stuff filled in and like kind of like a postcard style, I'm going to pass that to one of my homies that I know is really good with that, you know, or can execute it well, because I'm going to do a terrible job at it and it's going to like kind of tear me down. But then that person is going to say, hey, Alec hooked me up with this. Like, I'm going to be on the lookout for them too. So being a team player, I think is pretty key with like boosting your business at first, and like just getting out there, networking, finding the right people.
Now for the graffiti side of it, it takes a really long time, because you definitely have to perfect your craft, and it's obviously it's not as wanted or as desired, you know, in many cases. But you set goals for yourself. You do still stay community based, you know, look out for each other, and just keep going, document, and eventually it comes around, you know. Now, if you're starting out, you obviously there's certain levels to it. You've got your tags, which are the little script part of it. Make sure that you get that pretty well. You know, you can do it pretty quickly. Make sure it looks good. Then it goes into like a bomb or a throw up or a throwy, where it's bubble letters. Just make sure that looks good. You know, practice it, and then you get into doing like more pieces, more where it's more intricate. And then the same thing, you just keep going at it. And then you don't necessarily leave any of the other stuff on the wayside, but you constantly work on tags, constantly work on throwies. But as you keep going and you progress, you just keep, that will help you with the later stages of like pieces, and then even to productions where you're working with other artists to create like this big image on this huge wall or whatever. But with graffiti, there's not really a timeline. It's really just like attrition. That's pretty much what it is. Like, you just have to go through probably the worst things ever to get where you want to in graffiti, you know?
Do you say so?
I was just gonna say, like, being comfortable with it not being busy, because I feel like for Alec and other artists, it's like when you're not busy, you're stressed, like what's coming next? And then when you do a project, it's like, oh my God, there's so much going on. So I think just being able to manage your time wisely, and when you are slow or you may not have a project on the horizon, I think it's important to take that time to do the outreach, just reaching out. I think my dad told me a statistic. It's like, you do 100 outreach messages, like 10% are going to reach out, and then 5% will be a business deal. So just not being stressed about that time when you don't have anything coming, and then just you can focus on other parts of the business.
Definitely have to get comfortable with rejection. I feel like every art form, you kind of have to do that. It's like applying to shows. You really got to be able to take it on the chin, you know, and maybe that's not for you. But if you didn't get it, you were never supposed to anyways. It was never yours. I'll say another thing in what is going to speed up the process. You have a definite style. So like if someone's trying to get you to do something outside of that, pass it on. Because you want to do the jobs that you want to do in the future. Like, you want to be painting your stuff, and you have a definite voice and style with what you do. So like, go outside of that as little as possible. Just develop on that, you know, because then people are going to come to you specifically for your thing. And I feel like that's something that I've kind of gotten to, where like my stuff it's got like its own look, its own style, that people aren't really coming to me for like a howdy mural, you know?
Yeah, and that's super true, because there's times when people will look at me or come to me and say, hey, can you paint this? And I'm just like, that's someone else's, like that's another artist, like he can paint it, or that person can paint it. And sometimes they'll come in there and they'll say, well, can you do this other thing? And I'm like, well, I'd much prefer to do graffiti, And sometimes they do ask for graffiti, and I always have this saying where they always want graffiti until it's graffiti, And then they're like, oh no, well, can we change it up? I'm like, well, then you're gonna have to change up the artist, You just got to be true to yourself and just be like, this is what I want to do, and just be stubborn, obsessive, and just be like, this is me, And eventually it'll come around.
As far as graffiti, what are your thoughts on exploring different styles for yourself? You know what I mean?
I think it's good to explore different styles. I always, whenever I'm coming up with my designs and whatever I paint, I always change like just one small little thing, because for me I'm not taking like giant leaps. It's like a marathon for me. So I'll add like a certain drop shadow, or I'll make the letters look three-dimensional with a drop shadow behind it. And then I'll do that a few times, and then I'll say, okay, well now I kind of not perfected it, but I've got it to a point where I want to, where it looks good. So now I'll add a certain type of like highlight or something, like something different to it, like a certain shape around it, and then it kind of grows from that. And then I'll add that to the drop shadow and the 3D elements to it, and then it's like I'll combine that, and then I'll say, okay, well, how about if I mix the three-dimensional with the two-dimensional type of style, and maybe even something like it's cursive or like it's script almost, and then you add a little bit of that and bring it into your new style. Maybe you drop something, you don't use something that you did before, and then that's kind of how you develop your style from there, or that's what I do. And that's how I'm able to kind of develop different, I guess, letter fonts or different style of like filling in the letter, and even what's outside the letter. But it's always good to be on the lookout for different things. I sometimes get influence from like outside sources. I'm trying to think what was the last one. There was a time when I was doing I was painting food items, like a little like a piece of toast with some egg on it, like or ramen noodles. Like it was just because of a lot of the Instagram accounts had these really cool photos of like people would take photos of their food, and I'm like, well, maybe I can do that, So it's always good to look outside in other art forms or other anything, and then bring that into like the graffiti side of it.
Second question is, how long did it take to like solidify your style? That's on isolation. Okay.
I'm not sure it's ever been solidified. I feel like it's kind of like staying a student. I think I happened into my style from like a lack of patience. Like I have to be very like go when I'm doing my painting. And I feel like that sort of combined that, but I also don't have like a traditional art background whatsoever. I like went to art classes at a community college, but like I'm high school, and then I just jumped into like this is some of the workforce and made art when I could. So it's all self-taught. So I feel like that's kind of part of it. It's just your journey is going to create your style, but like if your style is sort of like capped, take stuff away, challenge yourself, get uncomfortable with it again, because that's where the growth happens. But like I feel like my style is just, it's always sort of just been a genuine reflection of what I've learned along the way.
And for me, it's just, I set a quota for myself every year where I paint 100 pieces a year. And that's kind of taught me to not necessarily like think about it as much, but kind of try to make it automatic a little bit, where I don't have to think about it as much as I paint, and that kind of helped me develop my style. But having that goal helped me, and I want to say maybe it took me like 4 or 5 years, but that is, obsessively painting. Like if you think about it, there's 52 weeks in a year, so that's painting 2 pieces a week. Sometimes you're out of town or something. You got to figure. The great thing with the graffiti community, you can find people in other cities and paint graffiti anywhere, But if you really want to get good, you want to solidify your practice with whatever your craft, then you do have to be a little obsessive and just constantly practice. So. Yeah.
for coming.